The ship came down on a Tuesday, not a Monday, when people were already miserable and an alien invasion might have fit the mood. Not a Friday, when everyone was too relieved to care. A Tuesday, perfectly unremarkable, the kind of day where nothing was supposed to happen. It landed in the middle of Riverside Park in Cincinnati, Ohio. Crushed a hot dog cart. The vendor, a 53-year-old man named Gerald Briggs, stood there for a full 10 seconds looking at the smoking wreckage of his cart, then looked up at the ship, then back at the cart. "That's coming out of somebody's pocket," Gerald said, to no one in particular. The ship was massive, black and angular, like someone had taken a knife to the sky and left the wound open. It hummed at a frequency that made pigeons fall off ledges. It blocked out the sun over a 6-block radius. On its hull, in symbols that no human had ever seen, were markings that the Galactic Dominion of Keth used on all their conquest vessels. Rough translation: "We are the end of what you were." Gerald lit a cigarette and waited. The Keth had done this 417 times. They had a process, a system, centuries of conquest refined into something so efficient it had become almost boring to the officers aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion. Supreme Commander Vrakathos had personally overseen 69 planetary submissions. He knew the timeline by heart. First, atmospheric entry with full gravitational suppression. This caused earthquakes in a 12-kilometer radius. Populations panicked. Good. Second, the landing. The visual of a Keth vessel, 300 meters of black alloy, settling onto a population center caused what xenopsychologists called the annihilation response. The species looked at the ship and understood, deep in whatever they used for instincts, that they were finished. The response was universal. Every species showed it differently. The Vrelians turned white. The Sathi released a collective psychic wail. The Derm 7 collective simply stopped moving entirely. But the feeling was the same. Terror. Submission. The beginning of the end. Third, Vrakathos would descend the ramp. Alone. The theatrical solitude of it was important. One Keth soldier, unafraid, walking toward an entire planet. The message was clear without a single word. "We do not even need an army for you." He had done it 69 times. It had worked 69 times. Vrakathos descended the ramp on this, his 70th submission. He heard laughter. Not a little laughter. Not a nervous, high-pitched release of fear that sometimes species made when cornered. He had catalogued that sound. It was thin and desperate, like air leaving a punctured thing. This was different. This was a crowd of roughly 300 humans. They had gathered in the 12 minutes, since landing, apparently having walked toward the sound of the impact. And they were laughing like he was the funniest thing they had ever seen. One of them had a device pointed at him. Recording. Another was holding up a flat rectangular object showing his image to another human. And that other human immediately started laughing harder. A small human, a child he would later learn, pointed at him and said, with complete sincerity, "Mom, he looks like a Pokemon." Vrakathos did not know what a Pokemon was. He stopped at the bottom of the ramp. He was 7 feet tall. His armor was black carbon composite, inscribed with the names of every world he had made kneel. His face, gray-skinned, ridge-boned, with eyes that were entirely silver, had caused, on one memorable occasion, a Vrelian general to faint at 30 meters. His voice, when he spoke, resonated at a pitch calibrated to trigger the fear response in most known biological nervous systems. He used that voice now. "People of this world," he said, the translation device on his chest rendering it in perfect English. "The Keth Dominion has claimed your star system. Resistance is not a choice available to you. Lay down your weapons. Kneel before." Someone in the crowd sneezed. Enormous, honking, completely uncontrolled sneeze. And because humans, apparently, found sneezing funny, especially badly timed sneezes, at least 40 of them lost control of themselves. Vrakathos waited. The laughter didn't stop. It evolved. Layers of it. Some people were laughing at his speech. Some were laughing at the sneeze. Some were laughing at other people laughing. It was a feedback loop of amusement that his xenopsychology training had absolutely no framework for. His second-in-command, Commander Thys, spoke in his earpiece from the bridge. "Supreme Commander, the biological readings from the crowd indicate they are registering amusement, not fear, not aggression. Amusement." "I know," Vrakathos said, very quietly. Should we initiate the atmospheric warning charge? A small one. Just to demonstrate. Not yet. He was a professional. He would handle this. He tried again. We have destroyed civilizations older than your written language, he said. The Vrelian collective, who had ships capable of folding space itself, fell to us in 9 days. The Sathi hive, who had consumed 4 star systems, surrendered without a second battle. Your world is that a chin? A human near the front said. The crowd looked. The Keth had a secondary jaw structure beneath their primary one. It was for crushing bone. And from the human perspective, it apparently looked like a very dramatic chin situation. He's got like 4 chins, someone confirmed. That's not chins. That's his battle mandibles, said another voice, very seriously, as though this was a helpful correction. His what? Battle mandibles. It's a Keth thing. I read about them. You read about them? I mean, the ship landed like 20 minutes ago. But there's already a Wikipedia page. Vrakathos processed this. There was already an information document about his species. Written. Publicly accessible. In 20 minutes. He was familiar with the concept of rapid information exchange, but had assumed it applied to military intelligence networks, not something that a species did recreationally. While standing in front of an active conquest vessel, making notes about his face. Is the Wikipedia page accurate, he asked, before he could stop himself. Complete silence. Then, absolute explosion of noise. Screaming laughter. Someone fell down. An older man in a yellow jacket had to hold on to the person next to him. The child who had mentioned the Pokemon was on the ground, rolling. He wants to know if the Wikipedia page is accurate, someone shouted. And this, somehow, made it worse. Vrakathos stood perfectly still in the storm of human noise. On the bridge, this was very quiet for a moment, then said, Supreme Commander, I am not certain how to log this. He went back up the ramp. He needed to recalibrate. The Keth conquest ship had a war room. 40 of his best officers sat around a table long enough to park vehicles on. Maps of the target planet glowed on every wall. Military projections, resource assessments, population distribution models, the works. Vrakathos stood at the head of the table and looked at his officers. They laughed, he said. Silence. At me, he clarified. More silence. Of the deeply uncomfortable variety. Junior Officer Pelk, who was young enough to not fully understand when to keep his mouth shut, said, Is it possible they are a warrior culture that expresses battle readiness through vocalized? They were laughing at my face, Pelk. Pelk went quiet. Senior Intelligence Officer Drott pulled up everything they had managed to gather on humans in the weeks of passive observation before landing. It wasn't much. The Keth Advanced Scouts had flagged humans as a Category 3 species, which meant primitive spaceflight capability, moderate industrial development, fractured political structure, not a threat. The threat level had never been the issue. The Keth did not conquer planets because they were threatened. They conquered because they could. Because order required it. Because the Dominion had decided, 300 years ago, that a unified galaxy under Keth rule was more efficient than the chaos of independent civilizations bumbling around making mistakes. The problem was not threat level. The problem was that the submission ritual required fear, and these creatures were apparently constitutionally incapable of it. Drott brought up audio from the crowd. They had been monitoring, just standing there, like, come on, really? Someone needs to tell him the whole, "We destroyed civilizations" speech hasn't landed since 2004. I'm literally going to make a TikTok. What is a TikTok? Said this. Nobody knew. Drott found a visual from one of the humans' recording devices, already uploaded to some sort of global network. It showed Vrakathos descending the ramp, in full armor, against the backdrop of the Eternal Dominion. Looking, he had to admit, extremely imposing. The humans had added music to it. He did not know the song, but the rhythm was cheerful. Bouncy, even. He watched himself march down the ramp to cheerful bouncy music, while a counter in the corner showed an ever-increasing number of humans who had watched it. The number was, in under 2 hours, approaching 1 million. Take that down, Vrakathos said. We cannot, Drott said. It is on a distributed network. There is no central point to. I said take it down, Supreme Commander. There are now 47 copies of it. He breathed slowly, controlled his response. He was a professional. 63. Dropped updated. The United Nations emergency session convened 6 hours after landing. The Secretary General, a compact woman named Helena Osei, who had dealt with enough human nonsense to be almost entirely unshakable, stood before the General Assembly and said, "We have confirmed first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. They claim to have conquered multiple species. They appear to be here for the same purpose. I am now opening the floor." The representative from Brazil said, "Did anyone else see the video?" 60% of the room indicated they had. He asked if the Wikipedia page was accurate, said the representative from South Korea, and there was a ripple of suppressed laughter that Helena killed with a look. "Focus," she said. "They have weapons capable of, according to their own statements, eliminating civilizations. We should treat this seriously." "They crushed Gerald's hot dog cart," said the U.S. representative. "Gerald has been compensated," Helena said, though she had no idea if this was true. "The question before us is, how do we respond?" There was a pause. The representative from Japan, who had been very quiet, raised her hand. "I have a proposal," she said. "But I should warn you that it is not traditional." Helena looked at her. "Go ahead. We invite them to talk," the representative said. "We offer them food. We show them around. We do not fight. We do not kneel. We just be human at them, consistently, till they don't know what to do." The room was quiet. "Be human at them," Helena repeated. "Yes." Another pause. "That's the whole plan?" "That is the whole plan." Helena looked around the room. She thought about Vrakathos asking about the Wikipedia page. She thought about the cheerful, bouncy music. She thought about Gerald, standing in front of his ruined cart, already having moved on to wondering who would pay for it. "All in favor?" she said. Vrakathos received the communication the next morning. It was a formal invitation, rendered in careful Keth translation, written on actual paper. Paper, a physical substrate he had not encountered since studying primitive civilizations in school. With handwriting on it. Actual handwriting. Someone had sat down and written this. It read, "Dear Supreme Commander Vrakathos, we would like to invite you to a meeting. We'll provide lunch. There is a very good sandwich place near the park. Gerald says the brisket is excellent. We understand you may have dietary restrictions. Please let us know. Kind regards, Secretary General Helena Osei, United Nations, Earth PS." The Wikipedia page is about 70% accurate. The part about the battle mandibles is mostly right, but the pronunciation guide is wrong. Vrakathos read it 3 times. He had never, in 70 planetary submissions, received a lunch invitation. He sat with it for a long time. Then he called Thys. "Get me a xenobiology briefing on human food," he said, "and find out what a brisket is." "Yes, Supreme Commander." A pause. "Are we going to lunch?" Vrakathos looked out the viewport at the city beyond the park. He could see small groups of humans moving around the Eternal Dominion's landing, perimeter. Not in panic. Not fleeing. Some were taking pictures. Some were selling things to each other. One had set up what appeared to be a folding table and was sketching portraits of the ship in charcoal. Selling them, apparently. "We are going to lunch," Vrakathos said. He had no idea what came after that. For the first time in 70 campaigns, neither did anyone on his ship. The brisket was, objectively, incredible. Vrakathos did not say this out loud. He was Supreme Commander of the 7th Conquest Fleet of the Keth Galactic Dominion. He had eaten the ritual victory feast on 69 conquered worlds. He had consumed things that did not technically stop moving until they were already in his secondary digestive chamber. He was not going to admit that a slow-cooked piece of cattle from a small restaurant in Cincinnati was doing something to him on a molecular level. But it was. Helena Osei watched him eat from across the table. She had chosen a small private room in the back of the restaurant. 4 UN security personnel stood outside the door. They were there mostly because protocol required bodies standing near things, not because anyone expected them to help much if a 7-foot alien with battle mandibles decided to cause problems. 4 other humans sat at the table. 2 advisors, a xenolinguist named Dr. Miriam Park who kept a small notebook and wrote in it constantly, and a man named Carl who was Helena's chief of staff, and whose main personality trait appeared to be calm in direct proportion to how catastrophic the situation was. He was, at this moment, approximately the calmest person on Earth. Thys sat beside Vrakathos. 2 other Keth officers flanked them. They had eaten nothing. They were watching their supreme commander try brisket with the alert stillness of people witnessing something they did not have protocol for. The sauce, Vrakathos said finally. The sauce is the thing, Helena agreed. What is in it? Gerald won't say. It's been the same recipe for 30 years. She paused. Gerald is the hot dog vendor whose cart was in the landing path. Vrakathos looked up. This is his food? His cousin owns the restaurant. The family caters events. She smiled very slightly. He sends his best. A silence. We destroyed the mobile food unit. Vrakathos said. You did. Another silence. We will compensate. He already replaced it, Helena said. He's doing fine. He sold the video rights to the story for more than the cart was worth. She picked up her coffee. Gerald is very adaptable. Vrakathos was beginning to understand. The central trait of the species. Miriam Park had been working on the Keth language since 2 hours after the ship landed. She had a gift for it. She was the kind of person who learned languages the way other people learned to breathe. Not by studying rules, but by absorbing patterns. By listening until the structure revealed itself from the inside. She had 11 languages by the age of 24. She thought in whichever one fit the idea best. The Keth language was structured around hierarchy and finality. Every sentence was organized to tell you who was dominant, and whether the thing being discussed was permanent or temporary. It was, she wrote in her notebook, a language designed for people who decided things, and expected them to stay decided. What it did not have, what she kept finding the edges of, the places where the grammar went strange and stiff, was words for negotiation, for uncertainty, for the particular flavor of maybe that humans deployed constantly, in 1,000 forms, as the primary lubricant of civilization. The Keth had words for submission, and words for dominance, and words for varying degrees of both. They had no word for, let's figure this out. She wrote that down and underlined it twice. The meeting proper started after the food. Helena laid out 3 things on the table. An actual physical map of Earth. A population figure. A list of human space capabilities. We're going to be straightforward with you, she said. This is what we have. You probably know most of it already from your scouts. We're not going to pretend to have things we don't. Vrakathos looked at the documents. You are attempting to establish credibility through transparency, he said. I'm attempting to have a conversation, Helena said. He looked at her. These are the same thing. In this case, yes. Thys leaned in close to Vrakathos and murmured in Keth. Dr. Park caught about 60% of it. Something about how this was a delay tactic. How submission species sometimes tried to establish rapport before ultimately capitulating. How this was not unusual. I speak some Keth, Dr. Park said pleasantly. Thys went very still. Vrakathos looked at her. Then at Thys. Then back at her. How? 12 hours with the recordings from the landing site. The patterns are not as opaque as they look. She tapped her notebook. Your language is actually beautiful, structurally. Very precise. Though I'd argue it has a significant blind spot. A long pause. You will explain, Vrakathos said. She explained. She walked him through her analysis. Carefully, not condescendingly. About the hierarchical grammar. The absence of negotiation vocabulary. The way Keth sentences structured reality as already decided, rather than in process. She showed him examples. She used his own words from the landing speech. Every sentence you spoke, she said, was in what I'd call the completion tense. The war is over. The surrender happened. You framed future events as if they were already past. She tilted her head. That's not a criticism. It's very effective for conquest, but it means your language has almost no grammar for what happens after. The room was extremely quiet. Carl, whose job it was to monitor Helena's meetings and interrupt if they were going sideways, was monitoring this one very carefully. He could not tell if it was going sideways. He could not tell what direction it was going. He made a note to discuss this later. Vrakathos looked at Dr. Park for a long time. You analyzed our language, he said. In 12 hours. Roughly, yes. I'd need much longer to be fluent. But the bones were. Our military linguists spent 4 months on your primary languages before this mission. Dr. Park blinked. 4 months? For English? She seemed genuinely surprised. English is not a hard language. It has no consistent rules, Vrakathos said. That's what makes it easy, she said. If it has no rules, you can't break them. He stared at her. She smiled. The meeting went for 6 hours. This was not how Keth Conquest meetings worked. Conquest meetings had a structure. Keth delegation presented terms. Subject species accepted, or subject species received a demonstration of what non-acceptance looked like. The whole thing typically resolved in under 40 minutes. 6 hours was a negotiation. The Keth did not have negotiations. They had, by the 4th hour, 3 large plates of what the humans called cookies on the table, because Helena had decided that if this was going to go long, then there should be snacks. And Thys, who had resolved around the 2-hour mark to simply try things as they happened, because the alternative was a headache, had eaten 7 of them. They were discussing, of all things, trade. Not the trade of resources for submission. Not the trade of continued existence for compliance. Helena had somehow, through a very gradual sequence of questions and redirections that Vrakathos was still tracing backward to find the origin point, gotten them to discussing what the Keth actually wanted from this system, and what humans could actually provide, and whether any of it might be structured as an exchange rather than an extraction. The Keth wanted minerals from the asteroid belt, specifically, a compound found in trace amounts in human asteroids that was critical for Keth drive systems and increasingly rare in the inner Dominion territories. The humans could provide that. What humans wanted, safe passage through Dominion-controlled space, because human probes had been quietly disappearing for 20 years at the edge of explored territory, and everyone had a theory but nobody had proof, and it turned out the proof was sitting across the table eating cookies. The Keth could provide that. This is a trade agreement, Vrakathos said, at some point in the 5th hour, with the tone of a man naming something he did not expect to be naming today. It is, Helena said. We came here to— I know why you came, she said. I'm offering you something better than what you came for. He looked at her. What you came for, she said, slowly, is a subject world that gives you what you need and absorbs the administrative cost of managing it. What I'm offering is a trading partner that gives you what you need and manages itself. She put her hands flat on the table. We're better as a partner than as a territory. I can prove that with numbers, if you want the numbers. Carl slid a folder across the table. He had prepared numbers. Vrakathos looked at the folder. He looked at Helena. He looked at Thys, who had cookie crumbs on his uniform, and the expression of someone who had stopped being able to contextualize the day about 3 hours ago. He picked up the folder. The Keth officers retreated to their ship at midnight. The Eternal Dominion hummed quietly in Riverside Park. The hot dog cart was back. Gerald's replacement, newer and shinier, with a small handmade sign that said, "As seen during the invasion." He had already sold out twice. Vrakathos stood at the viewport and looked at the city. It did not look like a conquered city. It looked exactly like it had before they landed. Lights on, movement, the particular organized chaos of a large human settlement doing what it did. He had watched submissive cities. They went quiet. They dimmed. The populations either fled or huddled. The cities became still in the way living things became still when they were holding their breath. Cincinnati was not holding its breath. 3 blocks from the ship, he could see a lit-up sign on a bar that now read, "First Contact Night, Drink Specials." A crowd was going in and out. They were having a party. Supreme Commander. Thys appeared at his shoulder. I have run the resource calculations from the trade proposal. The numbers are— he paused. They are better than extraction, sir. Significantly better. Over a 20-year projection. Vrakathos said nothing. They also factored in our patrol route inefficiencies, Thys continued, sounding slightly wounded. They identified 3 sectors where we are losing drive fuel to gravity compensation miscalculation. They corrected the math and included it in the projections. They corrected our math. The Dr. Park person did it in the margins of the document. By hand. Another pause. She was correct. Vrakathos turned from the window. He thought about 69 campaigns. He thought about the Vrelians, who had folded space, who had gone white and crumbled. He thought about the Sathi, who had consumed star systems and still, in the end, found the Keth were bigger. He thought about every species that had looked at his face and understood, in their bones, that this was the end of what they were. He thought about a woman putting down cookies and sliding over a folder of better numbers. He thought about a language with no grammar for what happens after. We will respond to their proposal in the morning, he said. Are we? Thys started. stopped, tried again. What are we doing? Vrakathos was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, he said. It was the most honest thing he had said in 70 campaigns. Across the city, Dr. Miriam Park was awake in her hotel room, surrounded by notes, dilding a Keth grammar from scratch. She had moved past the bones. She was into the marrow now, the verb tenses that didn't exist, the pronouns that distinguished between those who acted and those who were acted upon, the particular way Keth structured questions as barely disguised commands. She was also working, in a separate notebook, on something else. She was finding the gaps, the places where the language strained, the conjugations that almost worked for uncertainty but didn't quite, the nouns that circled compromise without landing on it. She was mapping a civilization's psychology through its grammar, the way you mapped a person's fears by watching what words they never used. The Keth were afraid of exactly one thing, she was starting to think. Not losing. They had lost battles before. She'd found references in their speech patterns, the special past tense form used for things that happened and were overcome. They were afraid of not knowing what came next. That was the gap in the language. That was the thing their grammar could not hold. The future, for the Keth, was always already decided, either by their own design or by the fact of their dominance. The idea of a future that was genuinely open, genuinely uncertain, genuinely waiting to be made rather than executed. There was no clean grammatical form for it. She thought about that for a long time. Then she wrote, in large letters at the top of a clean page, "They are terrified of Tuesday." She looked at it. She wrote underneath, "We invented Tuesday. We are made of it." She went to sleep smiling. The Dominion High Council received Vrakathos's preliminary report on a Wednesday. They read it 3 times collectively. Then they read it again individually. Then Supreme Arbiter Korath, who was 900 years old, which in Keth terms meant he had personally overseen the architecture of the Dominion's last 2 centuries of expansion, summoned an emergency session and sat at the head of the council table with the report in front of him and said, very slowly, "Explain this sentence." He pointed to a line near the bottom of the 3rd page. It read, "I am recommending a trade partnership framework in lieu of standard territorial submission." The council was quiet for a long time. "They resisted," said Councilmember Vreth, who handled military affairs. "No," said Korath. "They had weapons we did not anticipate? No. They have political allies already within the Dominion? Covert contact with another species that might? No." Korath looked around the table. His eyes were silver, the same as all Keth, but older, tired in a way that silver eyes could somehow communicate. They laughed at him. Another silence. "They what?" "They found him funny," Korath said. "They made videos. They put music to it. They invited him to lunch. They corrected our fuel calculations in the margins of a document and offered him a better deal than Conquest. He set the report down, and he is recommending we take it." Vreth made a sound that was not quite a word. "Furthermore," Korath said, "he has attached a secondary document." He held up a much thicker packet. "A linguistic and psychological analysis of the human species, compiled in 11 hours by one human female, which identifies, and I am going to read this directly, a fundamental structural gap in Keth grammar that prevents accurate modeling of open-ended future scenarios, which has historically limited the Dominion's strategic adaptability in encounters with high-entropy civilizations." He set that down too. The council stared at it. "A human," said Councilmember Dawes, very carefully, "wrote a critique of Keth's strategic cognition, based on our grammar, in 11 hours. She was apparently being polite about it," Korath said. Vrakathos notes in an addendum that she apologized for the directness and said she hoped it was useful. She apologized. "They do that," Korath said. He sounded, for the first time in a very long time, slightly uncertain. "Frequently, they apologize for things that require no apology. It appears to be a social mechanism." He paused. "I have been attempting to determine whether it is a submissive behavior or a dominant one, and I cannot decide." The council sat with that. On Earth, the negotiation had moved to a conference center in Geneva. This had required moving the Eternal Dominion to a parking area that the Swiss government had hastily designated in a field outside the city, which had required a great deal of paperwork that nobody had ever written before, and which Karl, Helena's chief of staff, had essentially invented from scratch over the course of a very long night with a lot of coffee. The Keth found the paperwork strange. They had been asked to fill out forms, physical forms with boxes. The forms asked for things like number of crew members, and purpose of visit, and crew. Will any weapons be discharged within Swiss territory? Please tick yes, no. This had stared at the purpose of visit box for a long time. He had written, diplomatic. He looked at it. He considered writing conquest for accuracy, but that seemed like it would cause problems. He left diplomatic. The form also asked for an emergency contact. He had no idea what to put there. Dr. Park had been joined by a team. She had not asked for a team. She had come to Geneva with her notebooks and her instincts and her developing command of spoken Keth, which was now good enough that the Keth translators on the other side of the table occasionally looked at each other when she spoke, because her pronunciation was, unexpectedly, very good. The team had been assigned to her. 6 people, linguists, anthropologists, one behavioral psychologist named Dr. Reyes, who had written her thesis on non-human communication systems, which had been theoretical when she wrote it, and was now suddenly not. Dr. Reyes had spent the first day of formal sessions doing what she called just watching. She sat to the side with a legal pad, and she watched the Keth delegation the way a naturalist watched animals. Not rudely, just attentively. In the way of someone cataloging, she noticed. The Keth never interrupted each other. Not once. When one spoke, the others waited, fully, until the speaking was complete. No overlap, no interjection, no talking over. Humans interrupted constantly. Helena interrupted. Her advisors interrupted each other. Dr. Park, in full flow about a linguistic point, got interrupted by Carl, who got interrupted by Helena, who got interrupted by Dr. Park finishing her original sentence. The Keth watched this with what Dr. Reyes was fairly certain was controlled horror. They think we're in conflict, she murmured to Carl during a break. Every time we talk over each other, they're reading it as internal disagreement, potential instability. Carl considered this. Is that bad? I genuinely don't know, she said. It might be making us look chaotic. Or it might be making us look like we operate fine even when chaotic, which might be scarier. Carl thought about this. Let's not change it then, he said. Let them figure us out. Vrakathos, across the table, was trying to figure them out. He had been trying since Tuesday. The more data he gathered, the more the picture complicated. He had gone in expecting a Category 3 civilization, primitive, fractured, easily overawed. The category system was built on measurable factors: technological development, political unity, military capacity. It did not measure the thing humans apparently had in excess, which he was still struggling to name. It was not bravery. Bravery was a thing you had because something scared you, and you acted anyway. The humans he had encountered were not acting despite fear. They were genuinely, structurally less afraid than they should have been. It was not ignorance. Dr. Park had analyzed their grammar in 11 hours. The UN advisor Carl had produced a 20-year resource projection that Vrakathos's own economists, when shown it, had revised their own models against. These were not beings who didn't understand what they were facing. They understood. They just continued. He watched Helena refill her coffee cup during a break. She had been awake. He had confirmed this through the hotel's surveillance feeds, which his technical officers had accessed in the first 20 minutes, because of course they had, for 31 of the last 36 hours. She moved like it. She also moved like she would not stop until the thing she was doing was done. You are not afraid, he said. He had not meant to say it out loud. It came out in the break, while most of the room was getting coffee or stretching, when it was briefly just him and Helena standing near the window. She looked at him. Of what specifically? Of us. A pause. She looked out the window at the Geneva skyline. I didn't say that. You behave as though I'm terrified, she said, in the same even tone she used for everything, which made the word terrified land strangely, like it was a fact, not a confession. You have weapons that ended civilizations. You've been doing this for centuries. You landed on a Tuesday and expected us to fold. She took a sip of coffee. I have been running on terror and caffeine since the ship came down. Vrakathos looked at her. You do not show it. That's not the same as not having it. She turned from the window to face him. What would showing it accomplish? He did not have an answer. In 69 campaigns, No one had asked him that. Your species, he said slowly, does not express fear because expressing it would be strategically disadvantageous. Sometimes, she said, and sometimes we express it fine. Plenty of people ran when your ship landed. She almost smiled. Gerald did not run. Gerald is Gerald. The species contains multitudes. He was quiet for a moment. The negotiations were about to resume. Through the glass door, he could see Dr. Park already back at the table, already writing, already 3 steps ahead of wherever the session had stopped. What do you want from this? He asked. Not the negotiating position, not the official ask. He meant, actually. Helena looked at him steadily. To not be conquered, she said. And maybe, after that, to go see what's out there. A pause. We've been looking at your stars for a very long time. We'd like to actually visit. He thought about that. The Dominion had, effectively, been blocking human space exploration for 20 years without the humans ever knowing why their probes disappeared. He thought about a species that had spent centuries looking up at the stars and had never, apparently, stopped wanting to go. The stars are not particularly romantic in person, he said. Nothing is, she said. That doesn't stop anyone from wanting to get there. The formal session reconvened. What it produced, over 3 more days, was something that had no exact precedent in Caith records. Not a submission treaty, not a conquest charter, not even a standard Dominion annexation with modified terms, which was the closest thing the legal staff could find. Dr. Park, who had been quietly working on the problem of there are no words for this in Caith, proposed a solution on day 3. We use a loan structure, she said. In linguistics, when a language encounters a concept it has no word for, it borrows from another language and adapts. We do this all the time. She wrote on the whiteboard in Caith characters. The Caith delegation watched her writing in their language with the focused attention of people watching something slightly unreal. I propose we borrow the human framework and transliterate it. She wrote 2 Caith words she had invented. They did not translate perfectly. They never would. But the shape of the meaning came through. Something like mutual forward agreement and something like shared open territory. The Caith legal officer looked at the words for a very long time. These are not standard formulations, he said. No, Dr. Park agreed. They're new. Caith law does not use non-standard. This is a non-standard situation, she said pleasantly. The words will need to exist eventually. They might as well start here. The High Council received the finalized draft on day 5. Korath read it alone, in his chambers, very slowly. It was not a conquest treaty. It was not a submission. It was an arrangement, complicated and specific, and full of contingencies and review clauses, and what the humans called dispute resolution mechanisms, which the Caith had never needed, because disputes were resolved by whoever had the larger weapon. It also contained, in an appendix, a request. The request was from Dr. Park, formally routed through Helena's office, which had routed it through the UN, which had routed it to the Caith delegation, which had passed it up the chain. It asked for access to the Dominion linguistic archives. Not military records, not technical specifications, not star maps or resource data. Linguistic archives. She wanted to study their languages, all of them, every species the Caith had ever encountered, the records of contact, the translation databases built up over centuries. She wanted to study the gaps, she said, the places where languages met and did not have words for each other's concepts. She thought it was important. She thought it might be the most important thing anyone had ever asked for. Korath sat with this for a long time. Then he signed it. He did not entirely know why. He was 900 years old, and he had stopped doing things he could not explain several centuries ago. But this he could not explain, and he did it anyway. And he thought, sitting alone with the document and the particular quality of late-night silence that came with being very old, that not knowing why might be the most human thing he had ever done. He signed it. The treaty had a name now. The legal staff had struggled with the title, and ultimately used the loanwords Dr. Park had invented. Rough translation, the first open agreement. It was not a perfect translation, but it was the best word for a thing that had not existed before Tuesday. The first human in space beyond Earth's solar system was a geologist named Dr. James Okafor, and he got there on a Caith cargo hauler called the Permanent Victory, which was an awkward name for what was now essentially a commercial freight vessel doing asteroid belt runs. James had not been selected for any glamorous reason. He was the best at identifying the specific mineral compound the Keth drive systems needed. He could look at a rock formation and tell you within a reasonable margin of error whether it contained what they were looking for. He had spent 15 years doing this on Earth. He was very good at it, and he was also, by the assessment of everyone who knew him, the most relentlessly cheerful person in any room he occupied. The Keth crew of the Permanent Victory had not been warned about this. Their cargo supervisor, a Keth officer named Bresk, who had drawn what she considered the short straw in being assigned to the human partnership runs, spent the first 3 days of the trip waiting for James to do something alarming. He did not do anything alarming. He asked questions. A very large number of questions. He asked about the drive system. He asked about the sleeping quarters. He wanted to know if they were cold because he ran hot and had brought extra socks just in case. He asked about the nutritional content of the Keth ration packs, then politely declined to try one, then thought about it for a day and a half and asked to try one anyway. He made a face when he ate it. He said it was interesting. He asked what was in it. Bresk told him. He wrote it down. "Why are you writing that down?" she said. "I like knowing what's in things," he said. "Food, rocks, people, same principle." She stared at him. "That was a joke," he said. "Mostly." The Permanent Victory had a crew of 22. By the end of the first week, James had learned all their names. Not the official designations. The Keth used positional titles more than names in professional settings, but the actual names that their families would call them. He had asked each of them directly and individually, and with an expression of such genuine interest that most of them had answered. Before realizing this was not a standard question, Bresk watched this happen and could not identify what it was. The closest Keth framework she had was information gathering, which was a tactical behavior, but information gatherers did not look at you like you were the most interesting thing they had encountered this week. They looked through you. James looked at you. Specifically at you. Like the answer to whatever question he'd just asked was going to be excellent, and he couldn't wait to hear. It was disarming in a way she had no word for. She looked it up in the loanword appendix that Dr. Park's team had been building and distributing through the Dominion's communications network, a document that had become, in the 8 months since the treaty, something that Keth officers quietly consulted the way you consulted a map in unfamiliar territory. The closest approximation was a term Dr. Park had coined, Veth Aral, literally, the attention that assumes value. The state of regarding someone as though they are, by default, worth regarding. Bresk had not encountered it before James. She was not sure anyone in the Keth Dominion had a native experience of it. The Keth regarded things as worth attention when they proved their worth. Value was demonstrated, then recognized. The idea of assuming it in advance, of treating someone as interesting before they had done anything interesting, was structurally strange. She tried it, once, on the 4th week of the run. She asked James a question, not about the work, not about the mineral readings or the formation structures. She asked him about the socks, the extra socks he had brought. She asked why he ran hot, what that phrase meant, what it felt like, whether it was a human-wide trait or individual. James's face did a thing. It was not a large thing, but Bresk, who had been watching him for 4 weeks, recognized it as distinct from his baseline expression. Something shifted, briefly, in the area around his eyes. He told her, about running hot since childhood, about his mother saying he was like a space heater, about the specific misery of socks in a warm climate, and the bliss of cool floors. He told her about growing up in Lagos. He told her 3 other things that had nothing to do with socks, but that came out naturally, the way things come out when someone asks a question they actually want answered. He talked for 11 minutes. Then he stopped and said, "Sorry, you got a lot more than you bargained for." "No," Bresk said. He looked at her. "I asked," she said. "I wanted to know." He smiled. It was, she noted, slightly different from his usual smile. Smaller. Actual, somehow. In a way the larger version sometimes was not. She wrote the observation in her personal log that night. Not an official log, a personal one. She had started keeping it after the first week. She did not examine why. The asteroid belt work went well. James found 3 viable sites in the first survey pass. The Permanent Victory's technical crew ran the extraction samples and confirmed. The quality was better than what the Dominion was getting from its current sources. Significantly better. The projection from Earth's economists had been right. The asteroid belt was worth more as a supply source than the planet below it was worth as a territory. Word traveled up the chain. The High Council reviewed the first quarter results and added 3 additional vessels to the partnership runs. The additional vessels needed human geological consultants. There were not enough human geological consultants immediately available, partly because the whole thing had moved faster than anyone expected, and partly because there was a specific skill set required, and finding people with it plus the psychological profile suitable for extended Keth crew contact took time. James had been asked to help identify candidates. He had sent a list of 7 people, with notes on each one. The notes were not formatted like professional assessments. They read more like, Priya, best eye for formation structure I've ever seen. Also, she's done 6 months at an Antarctic research station, so she's fine with confined spaces and difficult colleagues. And her sense of humor is good, which matters more than I can explain. And Marcus knows more about compound analysis than anyone I know. Can be prickly at first, but warm up fast. Just don't question his methodology before he's had coffee, or you'll have a bad morning. Bresk had read these notes. She had been asked to review them as the senior officer with human contact experience. She had recommended all 7, not because the professional qualifications were strong, though they were, because James's notes gave her something the standard personnel files never did. Sense of humor is good, which matters more than I can explain. She thought about that for a while. She thought about 4 weeks on the permanent victory, and James's 11 minutes about socks, and the particular way the crew had changed, not obviously, not in their work performance, but in some quality she was still mapping. Over the course of the run, she was starting to think she understood what he had been unable to explain. It mattered, because you were going to be in a small metal container with another consciousness for months at a time. It mattered, because the work was hard, and the distances were real, and the loneliness of space was a weight that settled. It mattered because humans, apparently, carried the lightness with them, and it transferred slowly, like temperature through a wall. She filed her recommendation. She also sent a personal message to Vrakathos, who had taken an interest in the operational reports from the partnership runs. It said, I think we should increase the human contact allocation on the extended routes. Not for efficiency reasons, he sent back. For what reasons? She thought about how to answer that in Keth, found that the language strained at it, switched to the loanword appendix, found the term she needed. Vetharal, she wrote. I think we are learning something about it. Back on Earth, Dr. Park had her archives, 8 months of access. 8 months of sitting in what the Dominion had set up as a data relay station. A small, intensely utilitarian building in Geneva that smelled of Keth environmental processors and inadequate ventilation, surrounded by the recorded language contacts of every species the Keth had ever encountered. There were 412 of them. Some were extinct. A significant number were extinct. The Dominion did not have a good track record on that front, and Dr. Park had known this going in, had prepared herself for it, and had still found the data harder to sit with than she'd expected. She cataloged them methodically, the living ones first, 63 species currently under Dominion administration in some form, then the ones who had surrendered and survived in smaller, managed populations, then the ones who had resisted and not survived. She was looking for the gaps, the places in the language contact records where civilizations had met the Keth, and there had been no words for what followed. She found them everywhere. Every species had tried to communicate in the same basic way, through the framework they already had. The Vrelians had used mathematical notation because they trusted mathematics. The Sathi had broadcast emotional frequencies because that was their primary mode. The Derm 7 had been entirely silent because silence, in their culture, was the highest form of respect, and they had wanted to offer it. None of them had had words for not knowing what comes next but continuing anyway. None of them had had the particular grammatical structure that humans deployed constantly, the one Dr. Park had started calling the living present, the tense that said this is happening and I don't know how it ends, and I'm doing it regardless. Human language was full of it. Not just English, she had checked. Across languages, across cultures, across the full wild divergence of human communication systems. They all had it. The tense of ongoing uncertain action, the grammar of continuing without the ending written. The Keth had a completion tense and a past tense and a command tense. They had no present tense of continuation. She was writing a paper, a formal linguistic analysis. She was also writing something else, a secondary document that was not a paper exactly. It was more like a letter, addressed to no one specific, that kept growing. It said things like, every species that faced the Keth tried to speak the language of what they already were. They brought their best self to the contact. The Vrelians brought their mathematics. The Sathi brought their feeling. The Derm 7 brought their silence. And the problem is not that these were wrong. They were beautiful. They were true. The problem is that the Keth language had no socket for any of it. The messages were sent perfectly. They just had nowhere to land. And humans did not send a message. Humans laughed at a bad landing, made a TikTok, offered brisket, and corrected the math. This is not a diplomatic strategy. This is just what humans do when something unexpected happens. We process it through humor and food and compulsive information sharing. We could not help it. Gerald could not help it. The child who said Pokemon could not help it. And, at the bottom, the sentence she kept coming back to. The most human thing about first contact was that nobody planned it. The Dominion High Council summoned Dr. Park to a formal address 6 months into her archive access. She went alone. She had been told she could bring colleagues. She brought her notebooks. The council chamber was enormous. The ceiling was so high, it was atmospheric. Korath sat at the head of the table and looked at her across 60 feet of polished floor. 11 council members on each side, 22 Keth in total, all silver-eyed and ancient-seeming in the way the Keth seemed ancient even when they were young. You have been studying our records, Korath said. Yes, she said. And you have been composing an analysis. Yes, we have read portions of it. She was not surprised. She had not been hiding it. What did you think? A silence. The kind that had weight. You say, Korath said slowly, that the Dominion's conquest methodology has a fundamental design failure, that we have been solving a problem that did not require the solution we applied. I say the Dominion found an answer before it finished understanding the question, she said, which is a very common mistake. Humans make it constantly. Another silence. You include humans in your critique, Korath said. I include everyone, she said. It's a paper about language. Language is how you model reality. If your language can't hold a concept, you can't think it clearly, which means you can't solve for it. The Dominion's language couldn't hold partnership, so the Dominion never built toward it. Earth's languages couldn't hold the universe is not alone, so we spent centuries arguing about whether it was true, before we had any evidence either. Way. She shifted her notebook under her arm. Everyone is working with an incomplete model. The work is figuring out which pieces are missing. Korath looked at her for a long time. He was 900 years old, and had signed a treaty he could not fully explain, and had started keeping, in the evenings, a personal log of his own. He had not told anyone this. What pieces, he said, does the human model have that we lack? Dr. Park thought about it. Not the academic answer. She had written that. The real answer. We're good at not finishing sentences, she said. We start things without knowing the ending. We're very bad at stopping once we've started. And we cannot, under any circumstances, resist asking what's in something once we notice it's there. She gestured at the room around her. The archive, the council, the 900 years of records she was still working through. I noticed the archive was there, she said. I couldn't help it. Korath made a sound. It was not quite a laugh. The Keth did not really laugh, but it was adjacent to one. Continue your work, he said. She continued. 2 years after the ship landed on a Tuesday, the Galactic Dominion of Keth held its first open session. This had not been a planned event. Very little of what had happened in 2 years had been planned. Things had accumulated instead, the way things accumulate when you open a door expecting a closet and find a hallway, and follow the hallway because that is what you do, and the hallway keeps going. The session happened because of a species called the Veth Harani. They were a Category 5, the highest threat classification the Keth used, reserved for civilizations with significant military capacity, developed FTL travel, and a documented willingness to use both. The Dominion had been managing a cold standoff with the Veth Harani for 60 years. Not war, not peace. The specific arm distance that exists when two forces are roughly matched, and neither wants to discover which one is slightly less matched than it thought. 60 years of that distance, and then the Veth Harani made contact with Earth. Not with the Dominion. Not through official Dominion channels. Directly with Earth. A transmission picked up by a human radio telescope array in New Mexico, rendering in a language no human had ever heard, which Dr. Park's team had decoded in 17 hours, and which said, approximately, "We know about your arrangement with the Keth. We would like to talk." Helena had forwarded it to Vrakathos before responding. This was the moment. Reading that forwarded message with its attached note from Helena. "Thought you should see this before we answer. Let us know what you think." That Vrakathos had understood that something had shifted in a way that was not reversible. The Keth did not consult subject worlds before engaging with other powers. They did not say, "Let us know what you think." Dominion space was Dominion space. Threats were Keth threats to manage. But Helena had said, "Thought you should see this," and Vrakathos had read it, and his first instinct had not been, "This is a violation of protocol, but we should figure this out together." And the instinct had arrived so cleanly, so without friction, that he had only noticed how strange it was when he was already composing his reply. He had written back, "Don't respond yet. Can we meet?" They met. Vrakathos and Helena and Dr. Park and Carl and Thys and, because she was now effectively the senior Keth expert on human operational contact, Bresk, who had just returned from her 4th partnership run, this time with a geologist named Priya who was, as James had promised, excellent. They met, and they talked. And what came out of the talking was something that required a new word. Not an alliance exactly. Not a partnership exactly. Something more specific and stranger. A shared decision to bring the Veth Harani to the table. Not to fight them, not to absorb them, to talk to them, to find out what they wanted and whether there was a language for it. "You want to do to them," Vrakathos said. "What you did to us." Helena thought about that, more or less. "It didn't work because we planned it that way," he said. "It worked because we couldn't help it," she said. "I know, but maybe it can be learned." Dr. Park was already writing. The open session was held on a Keth station at the edge of Dominion space. It was the first time a non-subject species had been invited into Dominion territory for anything other than a surrender ceremony. The Veth Harani delegation arrived with a military escort large enough to start a war, and stayed close together in the way people stay together when they are performing certainty they do not entirely feel. Their leader was a being called Athen Prime, 8 feet tall, silver-armored, with a crest that rose when she was tense, which was always, in the first hours. She looked at the Keth with the specific focused wariness of 60 years of Cold War. She looked at the humans with something closer to confusion. She had read the reports, she had watched the videos. Yes, the original video from Riverside Park was in Veth Harani intelligence files, because everyone in this part of the galaxy had apparently acquired it. She had briefed herself on the treaty, the partnership runs, the linguistic archive access. She had not been able to make a clean model of what humans were. She looked at Dr. Park across the session table and said, "In Keth," which everyone was using as the common language, "you are the one who studied the archives." "Yes," Dr. Park said. "You found the records of the Harani contact." She said this flatly, as though it cost something to say. "The first encounter. Before the Cold War. The records the Keth have of the first time we met. I found them," Dr. Park said. "Yes." The room was quiet. The first Keth-Veth Harani contact had been 100 years ago. It had gone badly from the first moment, because both sides had arrived expecting conflict, and the expectations had been self-fulfilling. 60 years of Cold War had its origin in 2 hours of disastrous first contact. Dr. Park had read every word of those records. She had built a model of exactly where the language had failed, the moments where a Keth formulation had been received as a threat when it had been intended as a statement, the moments where a Veth Harani silence had been read as defiance when it was actually consideration, the cascade of misreadings that had calcified into 6 decades of armed standoff. "I would like to show you something," Dr. Park said to Athen Prime. She put a document on the table. It was not a treaty. It was not a proposal. It was the reconstruction of that first contact. 100-year-old conversation, hour by hour, with annotations. Places where the meaning had bent and broken. Places where a different word might have made a different day. Athen Prime read it slowly. She read it again. Her crest, which had been high since she entered the room, lowered slightly. "This is," she started. Stopped. "This is your analysis of our founding conflict." "It's my analysis of a translation failure," Dr. Park said. "The conflict came after." The failure came first. A silence that was different from the previous silences. Thinner. More open. If this analysis is correct, Ethan Prime said, very carefully, then the war was a mistake from bad grammar. Most wars are, Dr. Park said. The specifics are different. The principle is not. The session ran for 4 days. It did not resolve 60 years. Nothing resolves 60 years in 4 days. But something shifted, the way things shift when you are in a room with people who are not pretending to be something they are not, and when the language is being used honestly, and the gaps are being named instead of exploited. The humans had brought food. This was a deliberate choice. Helena had learned something in the first negotiation, and she had applied it everywhere since. Food did something to rooms. It lowered a thing. It reminded people that they had bodies, and that bodies needed care, and that caring for a body was not a political act, just a basic one. The Vetharani had not expected food. Ethan Prime had looked at the spread on the table at the end of the second day and said, "What is this?" "Dinner," Carl said. She looked at him. "We eat in the evenings," he said. "Usually together. You're welcome to join us." The Vetharani delegation had conferred quietly. Then they had joined. The dinner conversation was not about the negotiation. Helena had learned this too. The formal session was where positions were stated. The dinner was where positions became people. You learned different things about a person when they were eating. What they reached for first. Whether they were cautious or adventurous with unfamiliar food. Whether they talked while eating or went quiet. Ethan Prime was cautious with unfamiliar food and quiet while eating. And then, near the end of the meal, she said something to Dr. Park in a language that was not Keth. Dr. Park tilted her head. "Is that Vetharani?" "Yes. I don't speak it yet," Dr. Park said. "But give me some time." She pulled out a notebook. "Can you say it again, slowly?" Ethan Prime looked at her for a moment. Then she said it again. "Slowly. The way you say something when you are teaching." Dr. Park wrote it down phonetically, then asked 3 questions about the structure. Ethan Prime answered the questions. Dr. Park wrote more notes. Vrakathos, sitting at the end of the table, watched this happen. He had seen it before. Dr. Park doing this particular thing. The focused absorption. The questions like small, precise instruments, opening something up. He had been on the receiving end of it. It felt different to observe. He thought about 69 planetary submissions. He thought about the faces he had seen at the bottom of ramps. The Vrelian who fainted. The Sathi who wailed. The Derm 7 who stopped moving. He thought about what it was supposed to feel like. The rightness of dominance. The clean resolution of conquest. He thought about Bresk's message. "I think we are learning something about it." He thought about Korath, 900 years old, signing a document he could not explain. He thought about Gerald's hot dog cart, and a child saying Pokemon and cheerful bouncy music on a video that now had 30 million views on a platform he still did not fully understand. He thought about Helena saying "I'm terrified" in the same tone she used for everything. He thought about the first time he had asked a question he did not need to ask. Is the Wikipedia page accurate? And the explosion of human sound that followed, and how he had stood in it, rigid and confused, and how that confusion had been, looking back, the first crack in something that had needed to crack. He picked up a piece of the food that was nearest to him. He ate it. It was, in his assessment, reasonably good. Bresk found him on the observation deck later, after dinner, after everyone had dispersed to their quarters. He was looking at the stars. This sector of space was outside Dominion Core territory. The station sat at the edge, where the mapped gave way to the unmapped, where the Dominion's charts ran to the edge of their own knowledge and stopped. "The Vetharani session," Bresk said, standing beside him. "It went well today. Better than expected," he agreed. James would say that most days go better than expected if you stop expecting the worst of them. Vrakathos considered this. "You quote him often. He says memorable things," she said, without trying. "That might be the most memorable thing about him." "A quiet." "Bresk," he said, "when you recommended the increase in human contact allocation, you said it was not for efficiency reasons." "No. What has it been for?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the same stars. "The edge of things. I think," she said slowly, "that we have been very efficient for a very long time. We have been so efficient that we built a civilization that runs without the thing that James has. The thing Dr. Park has. The thing that makes Helena sit down in a room with someone who could end her world and offer them brisket and correct their math. She paused. I do not have a word for it in Keth, she said. There is a loan word, Vrakathos said. The loan word is approximately right, she said. But only approximately. She looked at him. I think the actual thing requires living near humans for a while before the word makes sense. Like the word for a color you haven't seen yet. He thought about that. We have been efficient, he said. But we have not been. He reached for the loan word, found it fell slightly short, set it aside. We have not been warm. Bresk was quiet. Warm, he said again, testing the English word. He had been picking up more English than he officially acknowledged. Warm. The temperature thing, yes, but also the other thing. The human use of it for a quality that was not temperature at all. No, Bresk said. We have not. The stars were steady ahead of them. Unmapped. Whatever was out there had not been reached yet. James says, Bresk continued, that space looks different when you're traveling towards something than when you're arriving to claim it. What does that mean? I think you have to go out there to understand it, she said. I think that might be the point. Dr. Park's paper was published 18 months after the open session. It was, technically, a linguistic analysis. The full title was Contact Failure and the Grammar of Openness, a cross-species study of language structure in first encounter scenarios. It ran 280 pages and had 7 appendices and had been translated, by the time it was formally released, into Keth and Vethharani and 3 other Dominion languages. It changed things. Slowly. The way things change when they happen through language and thought rather than through force. It changed how the Dominion trained its contact officers. It changed how the Vethharani briefed diplomatic teams. It changed something in the way both civilizations talked about the future, the formal future, the planned and decided future of Keth completion tenses, becoming gradually more mixed with something less decided, more open. The loan words proliferated. The appendix that Dr. Park and her team had been building grew into something that had its own name, the common lexicon, words borrowed across species for concepts that had not existed in any single language, words for things that required contact to discover. There was a word for the specific awkwardness of eating unfamiliar food in a diplomatic context and trying not to show it. There was a word for the feeling of hearing your own language analyzed from the outside and recognizing the truth in what was said. There was a word. Several people claimed credit for this one. For the specific human social behavior of laughing at things that were not funny, because the alternative was worse. Several Keth officers submitted nominations for this term, because they had encountered the behavior repeatedly, and found that once they had a word for it, they respected it. The word for it, rough translation, the laugh that means we are still here. Gerald had heard about the word, eventually, through a chain of events that involved James mentioning it to Bresk, who mentioned it in a report that got into the general circulation, and eventually, after several layers of translation, back to Cincinnati. Gerald had been told about it by his cousin. Over the phone, he had thought about it for a moment. Then he had said, yeah, that tracks, and returned to the hot dog cart. Vrakathos returned to Earth once more, 3 years after the first landing. He came down differently this time. No conquest configuration. The ship was a standard diplomatic vessel now, smaller, and it landed on an actual designated landing pad that the Cincinnati city government had built in the park, complete with clearly marked perimeter, and a small sign that said, First Contact Memorial Landing Zone. Please keep clear. Gerald's cart was exactly where it had been. Vrakathos stopped at it. Gerald looked up at him. He did not look particularly alarmed. He looked at Vrakathos, the way he looked at most things, with the expression of a man who had decided that what was in front of him was probably manageable. Hot dog? Gerald said. I do not know if I can eat that. Vrakathos said. Fair, Gerald said. I've got pretzels. Vrakathos looked at the pretzels. He looked at Gerald. You were here, he said, when we landed. Lost my cart, Gerald said, cheerfully. Yes. Got a better one, Gerald said. He patted the side of the current cart. It was, in fact, noticeably nicer than the one in the original footage. Things happen. You figure it out. Vrakathos stood there for a moment. 7 feet of conquest history, in carbon composite armor, standing at a hot dog cart in Riverside Park on a Tuesday afternoon. Your species, he said slowly. You have been through many things. Historically. Many very difficult things. Yup, Gerald said. And you. He searched for the right word in English. He had been practicing. You persist. That's the word for it, Gerald agreed. He held out a pretzel. You want one or not? Frakathos took the pretzel. He was not certain he could eat it. He ate it anyway. It was, he decided, quite good. Salt, he said. Salt, Gerald confirmed. They stood in the afternoon for a moment. In Riverside Park, in Cincinnati, where a ship had landed and crushed a hot dog cart and started something nobody had planned and nobody had stopped. The sky was the same sky. It just had more in it now.